7 snipers confirmed. Let them come. Every American who steps into that valley dies today. The Taliban commander laughed as he said it, slow, deliberate, the laugh of a man who had already counted the bodies. Across 7 hidden positions, 7 professional killers locked into place, building a web so precise that nothing breathing could walk through it and survive. 12 Navy SEALs were already moving toward that valley, unknowingly stepping into the most sophisticated ambush American forces had ever walked toward in this region. They had no idea. If this story of one woman's impossible stand hits you in the chest, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay with me until the very end. You will not want to miss what happens next. She had not moved in 71 hours. Not a full stretch, not a real breath, not even a blink that lasted longer than a half second. Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan lay pressed into the Afghan earth like she had grown there like the dirt and rock, and Dry Scrub had decided one day to take the shape of a woman and just stay. Her ghillie suit had collected dust and debris until she was indistinguishable from the hillside itself. Her spotter, Corporal Danny Garrett, lay 2 feet to her left, equally still, equally buried, his spotting scope trained on the compound 840 meters downrange. 71 hours. Most people could not sit still for 71 minutes. Reese had learned somewhere between her first deployment and her third that stillness was not the absence of movement. It was a decision. It was the most violent, deliberate act a sniper could commit, the choice to hold every muscle in your body in absolute suspension while your mind kept running at full speed. While your mind cataloged everything, while your mind built the world inside the scope into a map you could read with your eyes closed. "How's your water?" Garrett whispered. He barely moved his lips when he spoke in the field. Reese had once told him he looked like a bad ventriloquist. He had not laughed. Neither had she. That was the job. "Fine," she said. "Liar." She did not respond. He was right. She had been rationing for 12 hours because the resupply drop had landed 400 meters off target, and neither of them could move to retrieve it without blowing a position it had taken them 3 days to build. So she had counted her swallows. She had made peace with the thirst. Thirst was manageable. Thirst was familiar. What was happening on that compound was something else entirely. "Talk to me about position 6 again," she said. Garrett adjusted his scope by a fraction of a millimeter. "Same as before. Window on the north face 3rd level. He's got elevation on everything in the valley. Whoever placed him there knew what they were doing." "They all knew what they were doing," Reese said quietly. That was the problem. That was the thing that had been sitting in her chest like a stone since hour 48 when she had finished her initial mapping and started counting overlap zones. 7 sniper positions. Not 6, not 5, 7. And they were not scattered around that compound in the random, opportunistic way that insurgent fighters typically place their shooters. These positions were engineered. Whoever had designed this defensive web had done it the way an architect designs a building, with mathematics, with purpose, with an understanding of angles and dead ground and the precise geometry of death. Position 1 covered the eastern approach. Position 2 covered the western ridge. Position 3 had a kill line running directly through the only covered approach from the south. Positions 4 and 5 overlapped in the center of the valley in a crossing pattern that meant anything moving through that ground would be caught in 2 simultaneous fields of fire. Position 6 had elevation on everything. Position 7, and this one had taken her almost 6 full hours to find, was buried so deep in a collapsed structure on the compound's northern perimeter that it was essentially invisible from the ground. She had only spotted it because of the way the dust moved differently near that rubble. A tiny disturbance in the pattern, a breath of wind that bent wrong. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah." "What's your read on the SEAL team's current position?" She felt him hesitate. It was a small hesitation, the kind most people would miss. But Reese had been reading Garrett's silences for 2 deployments. She knew what this one meant. "Based on their last reported waypoint," he said carefully, "they should be entering the southern corridor in approximately 40 minutes. Reese closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and put them back on the scope. "They're walking into position 3's kill line," she said. "Yeah. And they don't know about position 7. "Command doesn't have position 7 on any map," Garrett said. "We reported it 6 hours ago. I don't know if it got through." "Did you get confirmation?" Another hesitation. Negative. Reese breathed, slow, measured. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the kind of breath that her mentor, Gunnery Sergeant Frank Bishop, had drilled into her in the red dirt of Quantico until it became as automatic as a heartbeat. Bishop had been old-fashioned in every possible sense of the word. He had come up in an era when sniper training meant lying in a field for days with nothing but iron sights and a stopwatch, when wind calls were made by feel and by instinct, rather than by a laser rangefinder app on a tablet. He had resisted every piece of technology that the Corps threw at him, not because he was stubborn, though he was monumentally, but because he believed in the way that only men who had genuinely faced death could believe that technology failed and fundamentals did not. A rifle is a tool, Bishop had told her once during a range session that had run 6 hours past schedule because she had pulled a shot by 2 inches at 900 meters, and he had refused to let her leave until she understood why. A scope is a tool. Your laser, your ranging system, your ballistic calculator, all tools. You know what doesn't fail? No gunny. You, he had said simply. Your eye, your breathing, your patience. The understanding in your body of how wind moves and how a round travels through air and what it means when a man shifts his weight before he raises a weapon. That doesn't fail if you build it right. That's yours. She had not fully understood what he meant until her second deployment, when her rangefinder had gone dead in a firefight, and she had made a kill shot at 700 meters on pure instinct, using nothing but what was in her hands and her body, in 17 years of the fundamentals Bishop had hammered into her. She had called him when she got back stateside. He had just said good and hung up. She thought about him now, lying in the dust of Afghanistan with 71 hours of stillness in her bones, in a kill problem that no technology in her kit could solve for her. 7 snipers, one of her. One spotter with a rifle he was qualified to use but rarely needed to. 40 minutes before a SEAL team walked into a valley that would become a slaughterhouse. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury. Panic was for people who had not yet learned that the moment you lost your breath, you lost everything. Garrett, she said, start building me a sequence. He was quiet for a moment, and she could hear him thinking the almost imperceptible sound of his breathing changing pace. What kind of sequence? The kind where all 7 of them end up dead before the SEALs hit the valley floor. The silence that followed was longer than any silence Garrett had produced in 2 deployments together. Then he said very quietly, Reese, that's not the mission. The mission is to eliminate the engineer and protect the extraction corridor, she said. If 7 trained snipers have a kill web set up in that corridor, then yes, Garrett, that is exactly the mission. Command authorized a single target engagement. We report the sniper positions and what? She kept her voice absolutely flat. Not cold exactly, more like the surface of still water. We radio it in and wait for authorization while 12 SEALs walk into a crossfire from 7 professional shooters. She paused. You know what position 5's angle does to anything in the valley center? Another pause. Then yeah, I know. Then help me build the sequence. She heard him exhale, a long, slow breath that she recognized as the sound of a man making peace with a decision that was going to have consequences he could not yet measure. Okay, he said. Okay, position 7 first. He's the one they don't know about. Agreed. Walk me through the wind at that distance. And just like that, they were working. Because that was what you did. You did not sit in the paralysis of what might go wrong. You built the picture. You built the sequence. You took one step at a time through the problem until the problem was solved or you were dead, and you did your very best to make sure it was the problem that ended first. Garrett called the wind. Surface layer 4 to 6 knots, left to right. Thermals coming off the valley floor are going to push upward as you approach the rubble. I'd give you a 0.3 mil correction, right, and a slight upward compensation at that range. Reese dialed. She did it by feel as much as by the numbers the way Bishop had taught her, letting her hands remember what her mind calculated. Distance to 7, she asked. 940, give or take 5 meters. Elevation. He's below you by about 60 feet, compensate accordingly. She settled into the stock. She found the position she had been building for 71 hours, the exact geometry of her body against the earth that allowed her to shoot and breathe and shoot again without disturbing her setup. The rifle became part of her. It always did eventually. That was the thing people outside this world never understood. It was not a mechanical relationship. It was something closer to a conversation, a long, patient, silent conversation that ended in a single word. Time check, she said. 37 minutes to seal entry, Garrett said, give or take. 37 minutes, 7 targets. The math was straightforward in one sense and completely impossible in another because the targets were not standing still. They were not unaware of each other. In the moment she fired the first shot, every trained shooter on that hillside would know that a sniper was working. The sound of the shot would tell them distance. The direction of the echo would start to narrow her position. By the third or fourth shot, they would be hunting her as hard as she was hunting them, which meant every shot had to count. There was no margin for error. There was no second chance on any single target in this sequence. She had to build the order around the geometry of the positions, eliminating the ones who had angles on each other's fields of view first, so that each subsequent target was left momentarily blind before they understood what was happening. Walk me through the overlap sequence, she said. Garrett had been working on this in his head, she could tell, because his answer came quickly and with the precision of something pre-organized. Position 7 first before anyone knows the game had started. Then position 3 because he has the sight line on positions 1 and 4, and he'll be the fastest to vector on your position once the shooting starts. Then 1 and 2 in quick succession. They can't cover each other from those angles, so the order doesn't matter much, but one's closer and you'll be tracking right to left across the ridgeline, so it flows cleaner. Then 4 and 5 together, except they're not together. They're 200 meters apart, so you're going to need to... I know, Reese said. I'll need to reestablish after 5. You've got maybe 8 to 12 seconds between each shot before they start moving. They're professionals. They will move. Then I'll move faster. Garrett was quiet for a moment. And 6, the elevated position. Last, she said, because he can see everything from up there, and once the sequence starts, he's going to be trying to vector the others. But he's also the furthest from my position and the hardest shot. I need everything else out of play before I'm fighting for position against a shooter with elevation. That's going to take time. I know. Reese, he said her name like it meant something. You understand that by the time you get to 6, they're going to have your position. Yes. They're going to be shooting back. I know, Garrett. Another long beat of silence. Okay, he said finally. Then let's talk about your fallback after the sequence, because you're going to need to move. They spent the next 11 minutes planning the escape route. It was a route they had already pre-planned in the way that good sniper teams always pre-planned, building 3 contingency exits into any position before they committed to firing a shot. But the sequence she was planning would exhaust all 3 contingencies and probably demand a 4th that they were making up on the spot, threading through terrain she had studied in the dark over 71 hours of memorization. 26 minutes to seal entry now. Garrett, she said, yeah. When I start shooting, you get on the radio. You tell the SEAL team commander exactly what is happening. You give him position markers on every target I've already eliminated so he knows which zones are clear. You do not stop talking to him until the corridor is confirmed clean. That leaves me on comms instead of spotting. I know where they all are, she said simply. I've been watching them for 3 days. I don't need you to spot. I need you to make sure those SEALs don't enter that valley until I tell you it's clear. She could feel him processing this. She could feel him reaching for an objection and then putting it down because the logic was sound and they both knew of it. Understood, he said. She settled deeper into the stock. She found the rubble pile that contained position 7 in her crosshairs, the barely there disturbance in the pattern of broken mud brick and collapsed roofing that had taken her 6 hours to identify. She could see the faint line of shadow that was not quite shadow. The geometry of a rifle barrel lay carefully in concealment, angled toward the southern quarter. He was good. Whoever he was very good. In any other scenario, she would have appreciated that. In this one, she simply noted it and made peace with what came next. Wind, she said. Steady 4 knots holding right. No change. Thermals rising, less than I expected. You might go very slightly high, 0.5 mil, maybe less. She made the adjustment. She let her breathing find its rhythm. In, out, in, out. 1 more in. Hold. Time, she said. 24 minutes to seal entry. She had 24 minutes and 7 targets in 1 rifle in the 71 hours of accumulated knowledge she had built about this compound and everyone in it. She had the wind in her reading of it, the distance in her bones, the sequence in her mind like a piece of music she had rehearsed until she could play it without thinking. She had Frank Bishop's voice somewhere in the back of her skull saying, "Fundamentals. Everything else fails. Fundamentals don't." She had Garrett breathing steadily beside her hand, already moving toward the radio he would need in approximately the next 10 seconds. She had 12 men somewhere south of her walking toward a valley they believed was simply dangerous. They did not yet know it was designed to kill them. They did not yet know that a woman they had never met had been lying in the dirt for 3 days building the knowledge that would save their lives. They did not know any of it, and they never would not really. That was the nature of what she did. The work happened in silence and invisibility and patience, and then it was done, and the people it saved walked on and lived and went home and told stories about their missions. And somewhere in the background of those stories, never named, never seen, was the reason they had made it through. That was the job. She exhaled the last breath. She let everything go quiet inside her. The thirst and the 71 hours and the weight of what she was about to start. She found her stillness, the deepest kind, the kind that comes just before the world changes. "Garrett," she said. "Ready?" he said. Her finger settled. "Here we go." The rifle spoke. And somewhere in the rubble of a collapsed building 940 meters away, the kill web lost its first thread, the one no one knew about, the one she had spent 6 hours finding in the dust in the pattern of shadow. Position 7 went silent. Position 7 went dark. And Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan was already moving the barrel. We're already finding the next angle, already reading the wind for a slightly different distance because she had 23 minutes and 6 targets left, and 12 men who did not yet know that someone was spending herself completely to make sure they came home. She did not hesitate. She never had. The echo of the first shot had not finished rolling across the valley before Reese was already moving the barrel. Not fast. Fast was wrong. Fast was panic, and panic was death. She moved with the kind of deliberate, controlled urgency that lived in the space between speed and precision, the place Bishop had called combat tempo, that rhythm that felt almost slow from the inside, but produced results that looked impossibly quick from the outside. She had spent years building that rhythm. Right now, it was the only thing standing between 12 men and a valley full of trained killers. "One down," Garrett said, his voice already dropping into the flat operational register that meant he had shifted into a different gear. She heard him key the radio. "Falcon Lead, this is Overwatch Sierra. Do not, I repeat, do not advance into the southern corridor. We have an active sniper engagement in progress. Hold your position. Acknowledge." Static. Then a voice clipped in tight. "Overwatch Sierra, this is Falcon Lead. Say again your last. We are 200 meters from valley entry." "Hold where you are, Falcon Lead. I am not asking. Hold." Reese was not listening anymore. She had already found position 3 in her scope, the shooter covering the southern approach, the one with sightlines on both 1 and 4, the one who would be the fastest to respond once the sound of her first shot had registered. Professional shooters responded to gunfire in one of 2 ways. They either froze or they moved. The ones who had been in real firefights moved. They relocated, they found new cover. They started vectoring on the source of the incoming round. She had approximately 8 seconds before position 3 did exactly that. She exhaled. She fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Downrange position 3 ceased to be a problem. 2 down, she said, not because Garrett needed to hear it, he was on the radio, but because saying it out loud kept her own accounting clean. Kept the sequence locked in her mind like a checklist she was burning through 1 line at a time. 5 remaining. Positions 1 and 2 on the eastern and western ridges. Then 4 and 5 in the valley center. Then 6 elevated, watching everything, already beginning to understand that something was wrong. She felt it before she confirmed it, the slight shift in the pattern of position 1. A change in the geometry of the shadow she had been watching for 3 days. He was moving, not much. A repositioning, the instinctive response of a trained shooter who had heard 2 shots in rapid succession from an unexpected direction and was now recalibrating. She adjusted ahead of him. She put the crosshairs where he was going to be rather than where he was. She fired. 3 down. 21 minutes to original SEAL entry timeline. She had burned approximately 90 seconds. From the radio, Garrett's voice carefully controlled. "Falcon Lead, we have confirmed 3 enemy sniper positions eliminated. Do not move." There are 4 remaining active shooters with coverage of your approach corridor. Hold. The SEAL commander's voice came back with an edge in it that Reese recognized the sound of a man who did not like being told to stop. Overwatch Sierra, who authorized this engagement, we have a time-sensitive objective. Falcon led with respect, sir. If you move into that corridor in the next 10 minutes, you will not make it 50 meters. Hold your position. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell Reese the SEAL commander was a man who processed information quickly and did not let his ego get in the way of arithmetic. Copy Overwatch Sierra, holding. What's your timeline? Garrett looked at her. She could feel it without taking her eyes off the scope. Working on it, she said. He relayed that with somewhat more tactical language. She found position 2 on the western ridge. He had not moved yet, or rather he had moved but in the wrong direction, pressing deeper into his hide rather than relocating, which told her something about his training versus position 3's training. He was better at staying still than at reacting. That was a sniper's instinct, and under most circumstances it was the right one. Under these circumstances, it meant she still had a clean angle. She took it. 4 down, 3 remaining. Positions 4, 5, and 6, and this was where the geometry became brutal. 4 and 5 were in the valley center 200 meters apart. Their overlapping fields of fire creating the cross pattern that made the valley floor a death zone. She had to take them in sequence, which meant the second one, whichever one she chose to shoot second, would have approximately 6 to 8 seconds of knowing a sniper was actively working the area before she could bring the barrel around and acquire him. 6 to 8 seconds was a long time for a trained shooter. 6 to 8 seconds was enough time to move to secondary cover to break the angle she needed to make the shot significantly harder. She had thought about this during the planning sequence. She had not found a clean answer. There was no clean answer. There was only the least bad option, which was to take 5 first because 5 secondary cover options were more limited by the terrain, and then drive the barrel hard left to acquire 4 before 4 could complete a full relocation. Garrett, she said. He was back off the radio watching her. Yeah. Call me the wind for position 5 exact. 3.5 knots shifting slightly left. Surface thermals are increasing. You're going to go just barely high if you don't compensate down a 1/4 mil. She dialed. She found 5 in the scope. She had memorized the position geometry well enough that acquisition took less than 2 seconds. She fired. 5 down. Give me 4. Fast. 4 is moving left toward the boulder. It is 9 o'clock. He heard that shot. Where is he now? Still moving. 7 meters from the boulder. 5 meters. She did not wait for him to finish. She tracked left, found the movement, a dark shape transiting between the open ground and the cover of the boulder, and made the calculation in the half second she had before the angle closed. It was not a clean shot. It was a moving target at variable distance with shifting wind and a trajectory that gave her almost no margin. It was the kind of shot that was theoretically possible and practically improbable, and the kind of thing she had spent years training to make in the fraction of a second available. She fired. The shape stopped moving. 4 down, she said, but her voice was not steady this time. Her voice was the voice of someone who had just spent everything she had on a single moment and was not entirely sure she had enough left for what came next. Confirmed, Garrett said quietly. Reese, that was 6, she said. Talk to me about 6. A beat. Then he was back in it, back in the rhythm of the job, because that was who Garrett was and why she had asked for him specifically on this deployment. 6 is elevated north face 3rd level. He has not moved from his original position, but he paused. I'm seeing something different about his posture. What do you mean different? He's not looking at the valley anymore. He's looking for you. She felt that land in her chest. Not fear exactly. More like the sensation of a door closing. Position 6 had spent the last several minutes watching 5 of his team members disappear from his radio network, and he was a professional, and professionals did not stand there waiting to be the 6th. He was hunting her now. He was doing exactly what she was doing, building a picture from sound and geometry, and the pattern of where the shots had come from, trying to triangulate her position the way she had triangulated his. The difference was that he had elevation. He could see more of the hillside than she wanted him to. Does he have my angle? She asked. Garrett was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 very long seconds. Not yet, but he's close. He's working his way right along the ridgeline with his scope. If you're going to take him, Reese, you need to do it in the next, I know. The problem was the distance, 960 meters to position, 6 slightly different from the original calculation because his elevation had changed her angle. And the wind at that distance, at that elevation differential, was not the same wind she had been reading it at the valley floor. It was coming from a different direction. She could feel it on the small amount of exposed skin at her jaw. She had to recalculate. She had to do it in her head in real time without a ballistic calculator, with Garrett feeding her data as fast as he could, and her body translating that data into the micro adjustments that would either put the round exactly where it needed to go, or miss by the margin that meant position 6 finished what he was looking for and found her before she could fire again. When at his elevation, she said, 6 to 7 knots right to left. Significant. Probably double what you've been reading at the valley floor. She dialed. More correction than felt natural, but the wind was the wind. You did not negotiate with it. You read it and you compensated and you trusted the fundamentals because the fundamentals did not lie. He's still scanning, Garrett said. His voice had an edge in it now that he was working very hard to control. He's moving his scope. He's Reese, he's coming left. He's going to cross your position in about 4 seconds. Range, 962, constant. Elevation differential, 63 feet up. She made the final calculation. She let it move through her body rather than just her mind, the way Bishop had taught her, the way 17 years of this work had made possible the translation of mathematics into muscle memory, of data into instinct. She found 6 in the scope. He was scanning. She could see the small adjustments of his rifle barrel as he worked the ridgeline looking for her, building his own picture. He was 30 degrees left of her position in closing. He was good. He might find her in the next 2 seconds if she did not take this shot right now, with the calculation she had and the wind she was reading and the 71 hours of stillness that had led to this exact moment. She held her breath. She found her stillness. She fired. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. It was the silence of a job completed. She felt it before Garrett confirmed it, the particular quality of stillness that settled over a battlefield when the last active threat had stopped being a threat. 6 down, Garrett said, very quietly, almost like he was not sure he was allowed to say it that loud. Reese did not move. Not yet. She stayed in the scope, cycling through all 7 positions one more time, reading the terrain the way she had read it for 3 days, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that she had miscounted or missed something, or that the web had more threads than she had found. Nothing moved. The valley was still. Garrett, she said, yeah. Get Falcon Lead on the radio. He was already keying it. Falcon Lead, this is Overwatch Sierra. You are clear to advance. 7 enemy sniper positions have been eliminated. I say again, 7. Valley corridor is clear. Advance with standard spacing and watch your northern flank. There is a collapsed structure at the compound perimeter that was used as a hide. It is now inactive, but proceed carefully through that quadrant. The SEAL commander's voice came back, and there was something different in it now. The edge was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded almost like a man recalibrating his understanding of the situation he was in. Copy, Overwatch Sierra. 7 confirmed. 7 confirmed, sir. A pause. What's your status? Garrett looked at her. She gave him a small nod. We are Green Falcon led. Do your job. We'll cover your approach. 19 minutes and 30 seconds from her first shot. 7 targets, 6 of them clean, and one of them the hardest shot she had made in 11 years of doing this. She became aware now that the sequence was complete and the operational adrenaline was beginning to recede the way a tide goes out of a dozen things she had been ignoring, the thirst which had sharpened into something that felt like dry gravel in her throat. The ache in her right shoulder where the rifle had been recoiling against it at intervals for the last 20 minutes. The faint tremor in her left hand that she recognized as the body's invoice for everything she had spent. She ignored all of it. Primary target, she said. Garrett understood immediately. Engineer is still in the compound. Last visual on him was 12 minutes ago, 2nd floor eastern window. The SEAL team is going to need time to breach. That's not our shot, she said. Muck yet. Let them do their job. We cover. She settled back into the scope and reestablished her watch over the compound. The SEAL team was moving, and now she could hear the subtle shift in Garrett's attention as he tracked them through his spotting scope. Not that she could see them, they were too well concealed for that, but she could read the way he was reading them by the small adjustments of his breathing. "They're good," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They're always good," she said. "Doesn't mean they don't need us watching." For the next 6 minutes, the approach was clean. The SEALs moved through the corridor with the smooth, unhurried efficiency of people who had done this enough times that fear had become a component of their operating system rather than an override. They took the southern approach just as Reese had covered it, moving through the ground where Position 3 had been, past the clearing that Position 5 had owned until 19 minutes ago. And then everything changed. The crack of a rifle, not hers, split the air from an unexpected direction. Garrett made a sound, not words, a sharp, involuntary sound that she had never heard from him in 2 deployments together. She looked. She did not want to look. Her body already knew what she was going to find because of the angle of the sound and the direction he had been facing and the way he had gone, suddenly completely still, in a way that was different from the controlled stillness of their work. Garrett had been shot. The round had taken him in the left shoulder, high near the joint. Not a kill shot, but he was down his spotting scope, knocked aside his right hand, coming up instinctively to cover the wound in the way the body does before the mind has finished processing what happened. He started. "Don't talk," she said. "How bad? Shoulder? High. I don't think it, I can still." "Stop moving," she said. "Stop moving right now." She was already scanning. The shot had come from, she was running the geometry in her head, the sound, the angle, the direction Garrett had been facing from above, and right from a position that was not on her map. A position she had not identified in 71 hours of surveillance. A counter sniper. The Taliban commander had been smarter than she thought. 7 snipers in the defensive web, yes, but a separate counter sniper element positioned outside the web, positioned to activate specifically in the event that a hostile sniper engaged the web. A failsafe. An 8th shooter who had stayed completely still and completely silent for 3 days, who had not given her a single indicator of his presence, who had waited until the moment she was committed to the sequence and burning through targets and fully exposed in the operational rhythm she had established. She had been played, not completely, not fatally, but the move was real and it was intelligent, and it had cost her Garrett's shoulder, and it was going to cost her more if she did not find and eliminate this threat in the next 30 seconds, because a wounded spotter in an exposed position was a liability she could not manage, and a mission she could not complete at the same time. "Garrett," her voice was ice. Not cold, there was a difference. Ice had pressure in it. Ice had intention. "I need you to stay exactly where you are and not move an inch. Can you do that?" "Yes." His voice was tight with pain but steady. That was Garrett, even with a bullet in his shoulder, steady. "Your radio, can you reach it with your right hand?" A pause. The sound of movement brief and carefully controlled. "Yeah, got it. Get Falcon lead. Tell them there is an active counter-sniper element at an unknown position elevation above the eastern ridgeline. Tell them to find cover and hold. Do not tell them we have a man down. Just tell them to stop." "Reese, do it, Garrett." She was scanning the eastern ridge. She was reading the terrain the way she had read it for 3 days, but with fresh eyes now, the eyes of someone who had just discovered that the map she had built was incomplete. There was something she had missed. Some fold of ground, some angle of shadow, some geometry of the terrain that had concealed a position skilled enough to stay invisible for 3 days, impatient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. She breathed. She let the panic, and it was there. She was not made of stone. She could feel it pressing against the inside of her chest like something that wanted out. She let it sit there without letting it move, without letting it interfere with her eyes and her mind and the work of finding the one thread she had missed. 8 seconds passed, 10, 12, and then she found it. Not a rifle barrel, not a shadow that moved, something subtler, the angle of light on a surface that should have been uniformly shadowed. A tiny inconsistency in the texture of the rock face on the eastern ridge at approximately 1,100 meters. The kind of thing you only saw if you were looking for something wrong and had trained for 15 years to find wrong things in terrain that was designed to hide them. 1,100 meters into the wind, which had shifted again in the last 20 minutes and was now coming from a more northerly direction. A shot that was at the outer edge of her comfortable range with a wounded spotter who could not give her a proper win call against a target who was almost certainly already repositioning because he knew his shot had been heard. She ran the numbers in her head. Bishop's voice was there. Wind reads from feel when the data fails. You know what the wind is doing? You've always known. Trust what you've built. She trusted it. She dialed. She felt the correction more than she calculated it, the way you feel the adjustment needed to keep a car on a wet road, the kind of knowing that lives in the body rather than the brain after enough years of building it. She found the inconsistency in her scope. She let her eye focus through it past the surface texture into the geometry of what was hidden behind it. She found him. Counter sniper. Prone, well concealed. But no longer perfectly still, he was making small adjustments. The micro movements of a shooter, resetting for a second shot, and those micro movements at 1,100 meters looked almost like nothing. Almost, she fired. The inconsistency in the rock face stopped making its small adjustments. Reese stayed in the scope for 4 full seconds, watching, making absolutely certain. Then she exhaled a breath that felt like it had been in her chest for 3 days. Garrett, she said, still here. His voice had more pain in it than before. Not surprising. Pain got louder once the immediate crisis was past and the body had bandwidth to report it. Counter sniper is down. How's the shoulder? Not great, he said with the particular honesty of a man who had decided there was no point pretending. There's a lot of blood, Reese. Pressure, she said, right hand on it, all the pressure you can manage. Don't let up. Already doing it. Good. She made herself breathe normally. Get Falcon led back. Tell them to advance. Tell them the counter sniper threat is eliminated. Tell them to move quickly because we have a time problem. She heard him key the radio. She heard his voice tight but professional, passing the information. She heard the SEAL commander's acknowledgement, and then after a second, the commander's voice again. Overwatch Sierra, do you need medical assistance at your position? Garrett looked at her. She shook her head once. Negative Falcon lead, Garrett said. We're green. Complete your objective. We'll handle our end. She was already reestablishing her watch over the compound. The primary target, the engineer. The reason they had been lying in this dirt for 3 days, the reason 12 SEALs were moving through a corridor she had just cleared at significant personal cost. She found the compound in her scope, and she began rebuilding the picture she had been watching before everything broke. Second floor eastern window, that was where he had been. She found the window. She found the room beyond it, or what she could see of it from her angle, which was limited. She did not have a shot from her current position. She was going to need to determine whether the SEAL team could flush him to a position she could reach, or whether she needed to find a different angle. These were operational problems. These were the kind of problems she could solve. She focused on them because focusing on them meant she was not thinking about Garrett's shoulder, or the blood he had mentioned, or the 800 meters of hostile terrain between her current position and any kind of medical support. One problem at a time. Garrett, she said, can you still read the compound's eastern exposure from your angle? He shifted slightly. She heard the controlled sound of someone moving while trying not to move an injured shoulder. Yeah, I've got the eastern face. Second floor window is wait. He's moving, the engineer. He's moving away from the window. Which direction? Down. He's going to ground floor, I think. The SEALs must have. He knows they're coming. He's going to run, she said. Where does he go if he runs? Walk me through the compound exits. Eastern gate is the fastest exit for him, but it puts him in the open for 60 meters before he hits cover. Northern wall has a gap we identified on day 1, but it's narrow. And northern wall, she said. He's going to go north. It's the only direction that doesn't put him in the open for more than 10 meters. And a man who has survived this long does the math on exposure before he runs. I can't see the northern exposure from my position. I can, she said. I've had the northern wall in my scan since we set up. If he comes through that gap, I'll have him. What if you're wrong? Then the SEALs get him, she said, but I'm not wrong. She moved her scope to the northern perimeter. She found the gap in the wall. She had noted it on day 1 as Garrett set a collapse in the mud brick structure that left an opening roughly a meter wide at ground level. Enough to squeeze through, enough to use as a fast exit if you were desperate and knowledgeable and already moving. The compound entrance, the main gate, the southern approach, erupted with the sounds of the SEAL breach. Even at this distance, she could hear it in the way the air changed. The compressed sound of flashbang deployment, the directed, purposeful noise of a professional team moving through a structure, floor by floor. And then 30 seconds later, at the northern wall, the gap shifted. Something darker moved through the lighter texture of the opening. Something that moved with the controlled urgency of a man who had just heard his compound being breached and had made a decision. She had him. She had the angle. She had the distance, which she had already calculated and never stopped knowing. She had the wind, which had stabilized in the last few minutes into a consistent pattern she could read with confidence. She had everything. She put her finger on the trigger. And then she heard Garrett make the sound again. The same involuntary sound as before, but different this time. Not pain, something else, something that made her keep the crosshairs on the engineer, but shift a fraction of her attention to her left. "Reese," Garrett said. His voice was strange, thinner than before. "I need you to know something." "Not now, Garrett." "Yes, now." A pause. "The blood, I think it's more than I said. I think it's," he stopped. She did not look at him. She kept the crosshairs where they needed to be. The engineer was moving through open ground now, 30 meters from the gap, moving fast, but not running the disciplined movement of a man who knew that running triggered pursuit instincts in hunters. She had 2 seconds, maybe 3, before the angle closed and the terrain swallowed him. "Garrett," she said, and her voice was everything she had left, all of the steadiness, all of the control, all of the 17 years and 71 hours in the sequence she had just burned through. She put all of it in his name and hoped he heard it. "I'm coming for you the second this is done. You hear me? The second this is done, I am coming for you. So don't you dare go anywhere." She did not wait for his answer. She fired. The shot found its mark. Reese knew it the way she always knew. Not from the scope confirmation, not from Garrett's call, but from something that lived below conscious thought, the deep bodily knowing of a round that had traveled exactly where it was sent. 11 years of this work had built that knowing into her, the way weather builds itself into old bones. You felt the truth of it before you verified it. She verified it anyway. She kept the scope on the northern perimeter for 3 full seconds, reading the stillness that followed, and then she shifted to a wider view and swept the ground beyond the compound wall, checking for secondary movement for anyone who might have been positioned to receive the engineer and extract him if the breach went wrong. Nothing moved. The primary target was down. The kill web was dismantled. The SEAL team was clearing the compound floor by floor, their radio traffic a steady professional cadence in the background of Garrett's comm setup. The mission on paper was complete. She dropped the scope and turned to Garrett. What she saw made her stomach drop in a way that no firefight had ever managed. He was still conscious, still pressing his right hand against his shoulder. But the color had gone out of his face in a way that had nothing to do with the beast in the 71 hours of accumulated grime. His breathing was shallower than it should have been. And the ground near his left side, the ground she had not looked at because she had been working, was darker than the surrounding earth. "Talk to me," she said, and she was already moving toward him low and fast, covering the 2 feet between them with a controlled urgency that was the only speed she allowed herself now. "Still here," he said. His voice was thinner than before. Not weak exactly, just reduced, like a signal losing bandwidth. "I told you to keep pressure on it." "I did keep pressure on it." A pause. The ghost of something that might have been his version of a smile in better circumstances. "Apparently, I need more hands." She got her own hand over his, adding pressure, and felt the warmth and the wet of it against her palm, and made herself not react to that and made herself stay clinical and focused because the alternative was a feeling she could not afford right now. "The round, where did it exit?" "Back of the shoulder, high. Missed the lung, I think. Everything still feels attached." "That's not the technical criteria for lung involvement," she said, but she was already doing the field assessment she had been trained to do, reading the wound by feel and by what Garrett was telling her with his body, his color, his breathing rate, the way he was holding the rest of himself. "You're losing blood, more than you should be. There's a vessel." "Yeah," he said. "I figured. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that she recognized after 2 deployments and 4 years of working alongside this man, the particular expression of someone who had made a decision they knew you were going to argue with and had decided not to give you the chance until the decision was already done. Because you had 7 snipers to take down and an engineer to eliminate, and 12 SEALs about to walk into a kill zone, he said. And I had a hand and enough pressure to manage it for another 20 minutes. So I managed it. She stared at him for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "You're an idiot. You've said that before. I mean it more this time." She pulled her kit. Every sniper team carried a trauma kit that went beyond the standard combat lifesaver package. Bishop had drills that into her on her first deployment had made her carry extra hemostatic gauze and a tourniquet she had told him she would never need for a shoulder wound. And she had never in 11 years been more grateful to have been overruled by a stubborn old gunnery sergeant than she was in this exact moment. She packed the wound with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before and hated doing it, and she watched Garrett's face while she worked, reading his pain, the way she read terrain, looking for the indicators that told her how much worse things were than what he was saying out loud. He did not make a sound. That told her it was bad. The ones who did not make a sound were usually the ones who had decided that sound was a luxury they were not going to spend. "Garrett, stay with me." "I'm with you," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." "No, you're not, because I need you on the radio." She finished the packing and applied pressure in a way that made his jaw tighten, but produced no other visible response. "Get Falcon lead. Tell him the primary target is down. Tell him we need medical extraction at our position. Give him our exact coordinates." "They have the coordinates from our initial position report. We may have shifted since then. Give him current coordinates." She felt him move slightly, reaching for the radio with his good arm, and she kept the pressure steady while he worked. She could hear his voice more controlled than it had any right to be, passing information to the SEAL commander in the clipped professional shorthand of someone who had spent enough years in the military to know how to sound operational when they were not entirely sure they were going to remain operational. Falcon Lead's response came back quickly, too quickly for him to have had to think about it. "Overwatch Sierra, we have your coordinates. Medical element is with us. ETA to your position, approximately 12 minutes. Can you hold?" Garrett looked at her. She looked at the wound. She looked at his face. She did the arithmetic that nobody ever wanted to do. "Tell him we can hold," she said. Garrett told him they could hold. 12 minutes. She had held positions for 71 hours. She could hold 12 minutes. The difference was that for the last 71 hours, the thing she was fighting to preserve had not been bleeding through her hands. She locked down that thought. She put it somewhere it could not touch her work. She settled into the job of keeping Garrett alive with the same absolute discipline she had applied to every other problem in the last several hours, because discipline was the only tool she had right now, and it had not failed her yet. "Talk to me," she said. "Keep talking. About what? Anything. I need to hear your voice." He was quiet for a moment, and she felt his breathing. She had one hand on his chest, now monitoring, reading the rhythm of it. Then he said, "Do you remember the first time Bishop ran us through the wind reading exercise, the one on the range at Quantico, where he took away all the equipment and made us call shots by feel for 4 hours?" "I remember." "I thought he was insane," Garrett said. "I remember standing there thinking, this man has completely lost his mind. This is not how modern sniping works. We have technology for exactly this reason." "I thought the same thing," she said. "And then the rangefinder went down on the Fallujah deployment, and you made that 700-meter shot with nothing but your eye and whatever Bishop had put in your hands. And I stood there thinking." He stopped, breathed. "I stood there thinking that old man knew exactly what he was doing." "He always did," she said. "He just didn't always tell you why until you needed to know." "Do you think he knew?" Garrett asked. "When he trained you, do you think he knew you were going to end up in a situation like this?" She thought about that. She thought about Frank Bishop, the specific texture of him, the economy of his words, and the weight they carried, the way he could communicate more with a single look than most instructors communicated in an hour of lecture. She thought about the day he had handed her back a qualification card she had expected him to approve, and had instead written one additional requirement across the bottom in his exact square handwriting. One more drill, one more standard that was not in any official training guide, that existed only because Bishop had decided it should. "I think he knew something like this was coming," she said. "Not this specifically, but the shape of it. The situation where the technology fails and the rules don't fit, and the only thing between disaster and survival is what's built into you at the level below thought." She paused. "I think he spent 20 years building that into me because He'd been in those situations himself, and nobody had built it into him. He'd had to find it on his own in the field with people dying around him. Garrett absorbed this. His breathing was steadier than she expected. That was something, not everything, but something. He never talked about Korea, Garrett said. No, he didn't. But it was in everything he did. Yes, she said, it was. 30 seconds of silence. Then Garrett said, the SEAL commander, Falcon Lead. What's his name? I don't know. He sounds like a Hendrix, has a Hendrix quality to his voice. You've been shot in the shoulder and you're assigning names to radio voices. It's keeping me awake, he said, with a reasonableness that was so entirely Garrett that she felt something shift in her chest. Not pain exactly, but the specific feeling of caring about someone so much that their survival has become non-negotiable in a way that has nothing to do with orders or mission parameters. Then keep doing it, she said. She maintained pressure. She checked his pulse at the wrist strong enough, not as strong as she wanted it to be. She watched the color in his face, which had stabilized at a pale she did not love, but could work with. She watched his eyes, which were tracking and present and doing the specific job of staying present that she had asked of them. 8 minutes to SEAL medical element. She counted it in her head, not looking at any clock, just counting the way you count when the counting itself is a form of control. And then the radio crackled with something different, not Falcon Lead's voice. A different frequency, a different cadence, and a single word that changed the temperature of everything. Overwatch Sierra. The voice was flat and authoritative in a way that had no operational warmth in it at all. This is Kestrel Actual, respond. Garrett's eyes moved to her. She knew that call sign, Kestrel Actual, was not a call sign that appeared in field communications unless something had gone significantly wrong at the command level. Kestrel Actual was the designation for the operational oversight element, the people at the command post who watched the mission from a distance and made decisions about whether what was happening in the field aligned with what had been authorized in the planning room. She took the radio from Garrett's good hand. Kestrel Actual, this is Overwatch Sierra. Go ahead. Staff Sergeant Callahan. Not a question, not a greeting, just her name delivered with the precision of someone who had looked it up before making this call. You were authorized for a single target engagement on the primary objective. Can you explain why we are showing 9 confirmed kills at your position and a SEAL team that was told to hold its advance by your spotter? She kept her voice level. She kept her hand steady on Garrett's shoulder. She did the thing that 11 years had taught her to do. When authority asked a question that she had a complicated answer to, she told the truth completely and without decoration, because the truth was the only thing that survived the kind of scrutiny that Kestrel Actual applied. Kestrel Actual, I identified 7 professional sniper teams forming a defensive web around the compound that would have eliminated the SEAL extraction element upon entry into the southern quarter. I also identified a counter-sniper element outside the primary web. I eliminated all hostile sniper positions to preserve the corridor and protect Falcon Lead's team. The primary target was eliminated at the conclusion of the sequence. She paused one beat. 9 kills is accurate. I also have a wounded spotter requiring immediate medical extraction, awaiting Falcon Lead's medical element at our position. The silence on the other end lasted exactly long enough to communicate that Kestrel Actual was not pleased with what he had just heard and was deciding how displeased to be in real time. Staff Sergeant Callahan, you were not authorized for a general engagement. You acted outside your mission parameters. Yes, sir, she said. I did. Another silence. Shorter this time. We will discuss this further when you are back in post. Understood, sir. The radio went quiet. She handed it back to Garrett. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized, the look of a man who had just watched someone put their career on the table and was not entirely sure whether to be grateful or horrified. That sounded like a reprimand being drafted in real time, he said. Probably, she said. You saved 12 men. I know. They know that too. They know it, she said, and they still have to decide whether what I did establishes a precedent they can live with. A sniper who goes outside mission parameters because she judged the situation required. It is also a sniper who might go outside mission parameters the next time she judges the situation requires it, and command can't build operational doctrine around individual judgment calls. She said it without bitterness. It was just true. She had understood it before she fired the first shot. She had made the call anyway. Bishop would have done the same thing, Garrett said. Bishop did do the same thing, she said. In Korea, that's why he got out as a gunnery sergeant and not a colonel. He told me that himself. He said it was the best decision he ever made, and he would make it again every single time. Garrett considered this. His breathing was steadier now. Whether that was the packing holding or the conversation keeping him engaged, she was not going to question it. What did he regret, he asked. He regretted not having a student earlier, she said. He said it took him too long to find someone worth passing it to. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly, he was talking about you. I know, she said. 4 minutes to the medical element. She felt it rather than calculated it, the changing quality of the air around the compound, the controlled movement sounds she could read in the near distance that told her the SEAL team had completed their sweep and was consolidating before extraction, the professional rhythm of a mission wrapping up. And then Falcon Lead's voice on the radio, different from all his previous transmissions, something in it that had shifted a quality she could not name precisely but recognized. The quality of a man who had had time in the last 20 minutes to understand fully what had happened and what it had cost. Overwatch Sierra, this is Falcon Lead. Medical element is 2 minutes out from your position. They know the route. Is your spotter conscious and responsive? Affirm, Garrett said before she could answer. A pause from Falcon Lead. Then, tell your Overwatch we owe her a debt we don't have a name for. Garrett looked at her. She looked at her hand on his shoulder and did not say anything. She heard you, Garrett said. The medical element arrived in 90 seconds, which was faster than anyone had promised. 2 SEAL corpsmen moving with the specific urgency of people who had been briefed on the situation and understood that every second mattered, who came in low and fast and immediately took over the pressure management from Reese's hands with the smooth, wordless efficiency of people doing exactly what they had been built to do. She let them work. She let them take Garrett, and she stood back and forced herself to become operationally irrelevant for the few minutes it took for them to assess and stabilize, because interfering would not help. And she knew it, and she made herself know it, even though everything in her wanted to stay connected to the problem of keeping him alive. One of the corpsmen, young, efficient, with hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had done this in worse conditions, looked up at her while his partner worked. He's going to make it, he said, not reassurance exactly, more like a data point delivered by someone who was qualified to deliver it. The vessel's manageable. He needs a surgical suite, but it's not time critical at the level you were probably worried about. She heard this. She filed it. She did not let herself feel it yet because there was still work. There was always still work until there wasn't. How mobile is he? She asked. We can move him in about 3 minutes. I want to get one more layer of packing in before we shift position. 3 minutes is fine, she said. I need to talk to Falcon Lead before we extract. She moved to the edge of their position and got Falcon Lead on the radio. The SEAL commander's voice was different now from the beginning of this operation. She could hear the full weight of the last hour in it, the way a voice changes when something has happened that shifts your understanding of things. Overwatch Sierra, good to hear your voice. Falcon Lead, what's your team status? All 12 present and accounted for. Primary objective confirmed. We are ready to extract on your signal. He paused. Staff Sergeant, my men would like me to pass something to you. She waited. We heard the shot sequence from the valley. We counted. Another pause. 7 targets in under 20 minutes. Alone. 1 spotter on comms against a professional team. His voice had something in it she had not expected from a SEAL commander. Not quite humility, but its close relative. The sound of a man acknowledging that he had witnessed something he could not have done himself. I don't know what to say to you that covers that. Say nothing, she said. Just get your men home. Yes, ma'am, he said, and there was no irony in it, none at all. A Navy SEAL commander saying ma'am to a Marine staff sergeant and meaning it at full weight. She turned back to where the corpsmen were finishing with Garrett. He was looking at her and the color was better than it had been, not good, but better, which was the only direction that mattered. His eyes were clear. He was tracking. He had that quality of injured but present that told her the corpsman's assessment had been right. Ready to move? She asked him. Ready, he said. Then, Reese. She crouched next to him where he could look at her without turning his head too far. What? You violated about 11 direct orders today. I know. You're going to get reprimanded. Officially, it's going to go in your record. I know that too. He looked at her for a moment, His eyes had the particular quality of someone who had thought something through from multiple angles and arrived at the same conclusion every time. Bishop would say the mission is not just the target, he said. It's the people who trust you. She had heard those words from Bishop's own mouth in his exact flat Texas cadence, sitting in a range office at Quantico, while outside the window a class of new snipers ran drills she had already run 1,000 times. She had written them in the margin of her field notebook and then thought about them for years until they stopped being words and started being something built into the way she understood her job. She said, 12 men are going home because of what you did today. 12 men and one very stubborn corporal, she said, the ghost of the smile again stronger this time. Am I the corporal in that sentence? Do you know another corporal who got himself shot at 1,100 meters by a counter sniper nobody briefed us on? Fair point, he said. She helped the corpsman get him ready to move, not doing their job, just being present for it, being the person Garrett could look at while it happened, which was its own kind of work and not a small one. She stayed with him through the movement across the terrain toward the SEAL extraction point, covering the ground she had memorized from above for 3 days, experiencing it now at ground level for the first time, with the specific strange familiarity of a place you know from maps but have never walked. The extraction point was controlled chaos of the productive kind, a SEAL team that had completed a difficult mission, moving with practiced precision toward the helicopters that would take them out, the helicopter crews running their pre-flight checks, the corpsman integrating Garrett into the medical rotation with smooth efficiency. It was the machinery of the military working as it was supposed to work, and there was a specific relief in watching things work as they were supposed to after the hours she had just spent managing things that were working very much as they were not supposed to. Falcon Lead found her before she boarded. He was taller than she had expected from a radio voice with the kind of face that had been weathered into something that looked permanent. He did not offer a hand. He looked at her with the direct evaluating regard of someone who was seeing her for the first time and reconciling what he saw with what he knew. Staff Sergeant Callahan, he said. Commander, your spotter is going to be fine. My medical team is sure of it. I know, she said. Your corpsman told me. He nodded. I submitted a full after action to command an hour ago. Everything that happened in that valley. Every detail, including the 7 sniper positions you identified and eliminated, in my judgment that the SEAL team would not have survived entry into the southern corridor without your engagement. He held her gaze. I want you to know that. Whatever they decide to do with the operational deviation, they will have my assessment on record. She felt that land. She did not let it show how much it landed. Thank you, Commander. I should have said thank you first, he said, but I was busy being angry at Overwatch Sierra for telling me to stop advancing. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, something. I understand now why you did it. You would have done the same thing, she said. He considered this. Yes, he said improbably. He paused. But I didn't have to. You did it first. She boarded the helicopter. She took the seat next to Garrett, and she watched through the window as Afghanistan fell away beneath them, the valley receding, the compound diminishing the hillside where she had spent 71 hours, becoming just another fold of brown terrain, indistinguishable from the rest of the country. Garrett was watching her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just you have the same look on your face that you had after Fallujah, after the 700-meter shot. What look is that? He thought about it. Like you're already thinking about what you did wrong, he said. Like you're already in the debrief in your head, pulling apart every decision. She looked at him, and I'm wondering when you're going to spend 30 seconds thinking about what you did right. The helicopter banked, and the valley disappeared completely, and she turned her face forward toward whatever came next. The debrief, the reprimand, the paperwork, and the formal process that would put the last several hours into official language that would not capture any of the things that actually mattered about them. She thought about 12 men going home. She thought about Garrett's steady eyes and his hand on the radio while he bled and kept his voice professional. She thought about Frank Bishop saying the mission is not just the target, it is the people who trust you. And she thought about the weight of trust when it has a human face attached to it. She thought about the shot at 1,100 meters into shifting wind with no spotter data, the shot she had made by feel because there was nothing else left to make it by. She thought about all of it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she closed her eyes and started the debrief in her head, pulling apart every decision from the first shot to the last, looking for what she would do differently, what she could have done better, where the gaps in her preparation had shown, and how she would close them before the next time. Because there was always a next time, and the next time she intended to be ready for it in every single way that this time had shown her she had not been. That was the job. That was who she was. That was what Frank Bishop had built. The debrief room at Bagram smelled like recycled air and bad coffee and the particular institutional neutrality of a space that had hosted too many difficult conversations to retain any personality of its own. Reese had been in rooms like this before. She had sat in the same kind of chair, hard plastic, slightly too low, arranged across a table from people who had not been in the field and were now tasked with evaluating the decisions of someone who had. She knew the architecture of these conversations. She knew where the pressure points were, and she knew how to hold herself through them, not with defiance, not with apology, but with the flat and complete honesty that Bishop had told her was the only currency that held its value when everything else was being audited. She had been back at Bagram for 4 hours. In those 4 hours, she had been processed through medical, a friction burn on her right forearm she had not noticed during the operation, dehydration that the corpsman had called severe, with a look that suggested he wanted to use a stronger word, and a bruise pattern across her shoulder and collarbone from 71 hours against a rifle stock that the examining physician had cataloged with the neutral professionalism of someone accustomed to seeing what sustained field work did to a human body. She had been given water and told to drink all of it. She had drunk most of it. She had asked 3 times about Garrett and been told 3 times that he was in surgery and that the surgical team was experienced and that she should let them work. She was letting them work. She was sitting in a debrief room doing it. Across the table sat 2 men. The first was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, the commanding officer of the Marine Special Operations Element. She technically fell under, on this deployment, a lean, careful man in his mid-40s whose face had the quality of someone who had learned to process bad news without visibly absorbing it. The second was a man she did not recognize, introduced only as Major Chen from the Operational Oversight Element, which told her immediately that Kestrel Actual had sent a representative in person rather than simply scheduling a radio follow-up. That was not a good sign. People sent representatives in person when they wanted to read the room, when they wanted to see your face when you answered questions. She sat straight. She kept her hands on the table where they could be seen. She waited. Webb opened the folder in front of him and looked at it for a moment without speaking, which was a technique she recognized, not studying the contents because he had already studied them, but using the pause to establish the register of the conversation. Then he looked up. "Staff Sergeant Callahan," he said, "let's start from the beginning. Walk us through the decision to engage the sniper positions." She walked them through it, completely. Every step of the reasoning, every piece of information that had informed the decision, every moment where she had considered an alternative and rejected it and why. She did not editorialize. She did not defend. She laid the operational picture as she had seen it across the table between them and let it speak for itself because the picture was clear and she had no interest in obscuring any part of it. When she finished, Major Chen leaned forward slightly. He had not spoken yet. He had a notepad in front of him that he had written nothing on, which told her he was the kind of man who stored information in his head and reviewed it later. "Staff Sergeant, at what point did you make the decision to act without requesting authorization?" "When I calculated that the time required to request and receive authorization exceeded the time available before the SEAL team entered the kill zone," she said. "I estimated 40 minutes from initial identification of the full defensive web to Falcon Leads Valley entry. My last communication with command had been 6 hours prior when I reported the 7th sniper position and received no confirmation that the report had been received. I could not reach command on the primary frequency. I could not wait." "You could not reach command," Chen said. It was not a statement and not quite a question. The specific inflection of someone flagging something for later. "Correct. Our logs show the primary frequency was active throughout the operational window," he said. "There is no record of a communication attempt from your position during the period you are describing." The room got very quiet. Not for Reese, for the 2 men across from her who had just said something that they expected to change the shape of the conversation and were watching to see if it did. She met Chen's eyes directly. With respect, major communication from a concealed sniper position is not a simple radio call. Keying a transmission in a position that has taken 3 days to build can produce sound signatures that compromise the position. My spotter managed communications while I maintained scope discipline. I will defer to Corporal Garrett's account of what transmissions were attempted, but I will not defer to a log that says we did not try because I know that we did. Chen wrote something on his notepad. She could not see what. She did not try to. Webb cleared his throat. It was the specific throat clearing of a man about to change the subject in a way that felt like mercy, but might not be. Let's talk about the tactical picture. You assessed 7 confirmed sniper positions, plus a counter-sniper element that was outside the primary defensive web. Walk me through how you identified them and in what sequence you made the determination to engage. She walked him through it. The 71 hours of observation, the methodology she had used to map each position, the 6 hours it had taken to find position 7 in the collapsed rubble, the counter-sniper she had not found until he had already fired. That last part she delivered without inflection, because inflection would have suggested she was either minimizing or dramatizing, and she wanted neither. She wanted them to hear exactly what had happened. When she reached the counter-sniper, Webb's expression shifted by a fraction. You identified a professional counter-sniper element that had maintained concealment for the same 71-hour period you were in position, he said. Yes, sir. And you had not detected this element during that period. No, sir. But you eliminated the threat after your spotter was wounded. Yes, sir. Webb looked at his folder again. At 1,100 meters, with no active spotter, into a wind that your spotter, who was at that point incapacitated, could not call for you. That's correct. Another silence? This one had a different quality from the previous one. The previous silence had been adversarial. This one was something else. Something closer to the silence that follows when a room full of people hears something they had not expected to hear and are working out what to do with it. Chen put his pen down. Not dramatically, just put it down. Staff Sergeant Callahan, I want to be direct with you about something. Please, she said. The operational deviation you committed today, engaging targets beyond your authorized mission parameters without command authorization, is a serious matter. It is the kind of matter that, under different circumstances, ends careers and produces courts-martial. He paused. Those are the different circumstances. I want to tell you what the actual circumstances are. She waited. Falcon Leeds submitted an after-action report within 2 hours of extraction. So did 3 of his senior enlisted men independently and without coordination. All 4 reports state explicitly that the SEAL team would not have survived entry into the southern corridor without your engagement of the sniper positions. Chen folded his hands on the table. Additionally, signals intelligence collected in the 48 hours following the operation has identified the 7 sniper team members you eliminated as contracted professionals from 3 different countries, not local insurgents. The defensive web you dismantled was a deliberate and sophisticated ambush designed specifically to counter an American extraction operation. The counter-sniper you identified was not on any of our intelligence assessments of the compound's defensive capability. Webb spoke then, which means you identified something we missed. And then you made the decision that saved 12 lives based on what you saw rather than what we told you to expect. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that was not already said. You are going to receive a formal reprimand, Chen said. It will be entered in your record. The reprimand will specifically cite the operational deviation and the lack of command authorization for the expanded engagement. He paused. It will also be accompanied by a recommendation for the Silver Star submitted jointly by Falcon Leeds, Commanding Officer, and Lieutenant Colonel Webb. The recommendation cites the elimination of a professional multinational sniper network under extreme conditions, the preservation of a 12-man SEAL team, and the completion of the primary objective against those adverse conditions. Another pause. Both documents will be in your record simultaneously. The reprimand is unavoidable. The recommendation is deserved. She absorbed this. She sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with something that is genuinely complex, not pretending it was simple, not performing a reaction she did not actually have. With respect, sir, she said, I didn't act for a medal. I know that, Chen said, and for the first time there was something in his voice that was not entirely official. Something that had been in the room all along, but had been maintaining appropriate professional distance until this moment. That's part of why you're getting one. Webb stood, and she stood with him, and he extended his hand across the table in the way that senior officers rarely did with staff sergeants and meant something specific when they did. She took it. His grip was firm and brief and said everything it needed to. "Get some rest, Callahan," he said, "and go check on your spotter. He's out of surgery." She heard those words "out of surgery" and felt them reach a part of her that had been held at careful distance for the last several hours. She did not let it show. She thanked them both. She walked out of the debrief room and down the corridor and through the doors that led toward the medical wing, and she kept her pace measured and controlled until she turned a corner that put her out of sight of anyone official, and then she stopped for exactly 5 seconds and leaned against the wall and breathed. Just breathed. Then she kept walking. Garrett was in a recovery bed looking aggressively less pale than he had on the hillside, which was the most important thing she registered when she walked into the room. He had a drainage tube and an IV line and a bandaging arrangement across his left shoulder that was professionally clean and a great deal more comfortable looking than what she had managed in the field. He was awake. His eyes were tracking. He saw her come in, and something in his face shifted in the way that people's faces shift when the person they were most worried about shows up and is verifiably still alive. "You look terrible," he said. "You have a bullet hole in your shoulder," she said. "I've had worse." "You've never had worse." He thought about it. "Fair. Sit down before you fall down. You look like you've been awake for 3 days." "I have been awake for 3 days." She sat in the chair beside his bed in the act of sitting, really sitting, not the operational stillness of a hide position, but the actual physical surrender of a body to a chair produced an awareness of exhaustion so complete and thorough that it felt almost structural, like the exhaustion was weight-bearing, like it had been holding her up the whole time and was now politely informing her that it intended to step aside. "Debrief?" Garrett asked. "Done." And reprimand and silver star simultaneously. He looked at her for a moment. Bishop would call that a perfect outcome. Bishop would call it exactly what it is, she said, a system doing 2 contradictory things at once because it doesn't have a clean category for the thing that actually happened. The thing that actually happened, Garrett said, was that you dismantled a professional multinational kill web in under 20 minutes and saved 12 men and completed the primary objective and then made an 1,100-meter shot with no spotter data while I was lying there leaking on the hillside. He said it with the flat delivery of someone reading a report, which made it somehow worse than if he had said it with feeling. The system not having a clean category for that seems about right. She looked at him. She looked at the bandaging and the IV and the specific quality of his face that had survived surgery and was going to survive everything else. She felt the last several hours fully for the first time, not just the operational weight of them, but the personal weight, the weight that had nothing to do with mission parameters and everything to do with the fact that this man had stayed on the radio while he bled and kept his voice professional and told her to complete the sequence and trusted her completely and without reservation. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah. Don't ever do that again." He looked at her. "Do what? Manage a wound for 40 minutes without telling me how bad it was." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You had 7 snipers." "I don't care what I had. You tell me. Next time you tell me immediately and we figure it out together. That is not negotiable." He absorbed this. He had the particular expression of a man who understood that he was being told something true and important and was deciding whether to push back on the principle or simply accept it. He chose to accept it, which told her that on some level he had known during the operation that he should have told her sooner and had been carrying that knowledge as its own separate weight. "Understood," he said. "Good." Another silence. Not uncomfortable. The silence of 2 people who have been through something together and are sitting on the other side of it and are not quite ready to turn it into language yet. Then Garrett said Falcon Lead came by while I was in recovery. She looked up. "The SEAL commander." "His name is actually Hendricks," Garrett said with a specific satisfaction that she chose not to acknowledge. "Commander Hendricks, he came in while I was still pretty out of it from the anesthesia, but I remember enough." He said. Garrett stopped. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the look of a man choosing his words with unusual care. He said he has been doing this for 16 years. He said he has seen a lot of things in 16 years. And he said, what you did today, alone with one wounded spotter against a professional team that had been set up specifically to kill Americans, was something he did not have a word for yet. She did not respond. He said he was going to find a word for it, Garrett said. He said he thought it deserved one. Outside the window of the recovery room, and she could not see what was outside it from where she sat, just a rectangle of artificial light that might have been dawn or might have been floodlights. The base continued its constant operational rhythm. Helicopters in the distance, radio traffic bleeding through walls. The machinery of a long war doing what it did, grinding forward day after day in the way that long things ground forward, consuming people, and producing outcomes that were sometimes clean and sometimes not. She thought about Frank Bishop. She thought about him sitting in that range office at Quantico, looking at a young sniper who was good, but not yet fully formed, who had the natural ability, but had not yet been through enough real weight to know what she was actually made of. She thought about the patience he had brought to the work of building her, not just the technical skills, though those had been formidable and thorough, but the deeper architecture. The part that held when everything else was failing. The part that had made the 1,100-meter shot when there was nothing left to make it with except what he had put into her. She had called him after Fallujah. She had called him after the firefight in Helmand that had produced her second commendation. She would call him after this. She hoped he was still sharp enough to hear it. He was in his 80s now, living in a small house in Texas with a garden he tended, with the same meticulous attention he had brought to everything, and his mind was still quick, but his body was starting to say the things old bodies say when they have been used hard for a long time. She called him every few months. He always answered on the second ring, never the first and never the third, and he always said the same thing. Tell me what's happening. Not how are you, not hello, just tell me what's happening. Because what was happening was the substance of everything between them. You should sleep, Garrett said. I'm not tired, she said. He gave her the look that this answer deserved. You've been awake for approximately 75 hours. You are clinically dehydrated. You have a bruise pattern across your shoulder that the medic described to me as extensive, and you are sitting in a chair like someone who is only being held upright by the decision to be upright. You are exhausted. The debrief is done, she said. The reprimand is coming. The recommendation is coming. You're out of surgery. Falcon Lead's team is accounted for. The primary target is down. She looked at him. What exactly would I sleep instead of... He looked back at her for a long moment. Then he said, there will be an inquiry. She knew that, of course she knew that. The reprimand was the first layer of formal response, but an engagement of this scope, 9 kills an unauthorized multi-target engagement, a wounded spotter mission parameters exceeded by any measurable standard, would generate an inquiry. People would review everything she had done and said and decided, and they would render a formal institutional judgment about whether the standard she had set was one the Corps could accommodate. I know, she said. They might push hard on the counter sniper you missed, he said, not to hurt her, to prepare her. She knew the difference. They might argue that an incomplete picture of the threat environment was a factor in the decision to act outside parameters, that if you'd had the full picture, you might have chosen differently. If I'd had the full picture, she said, I would have started with a counter sniper and then run the same sequence on the web. The outcome would have been the same. You know that. The inquiry board might not. Then I'll explain it to them the way I explained it to you just now. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not worried. I'm worried about the right things, she said. I'm worried about whether Falcon Lead's team got clean extraction. I'm worried about whether the signals intelligence from the compound is going to produce anything useful. I'm worried about whether command is going to draw the right lessons from the fact that we had 0 intelligence on the counter sniper element and 7 professional international contractors operating in that valley. She paused. I'm not worried about what an inquiry board is going to decide about me specifically, because I know what I did and I know why, and I would do it again. Garrett absorbed this with the particular stillness of a man who had known her long enough to understand that this was not bravado, it was just true. Webb came by too, he said then. She looked at him. While you were in the debrief, he came in, looked at my chart, looked at me and said, Garrett paused, and there was something in his pause that told her what came next mattered. He said the Corps doesn't produce many like her, and then he left. She said nothing. I told him I was aware, Garrett said. The silence that settled between them after that was the warm kind, the kind that does not need to be filled because it is already full. It was the silence of two people who understood each other at a level that conversation could approach but not quite reach, and who had learned to be comfortable in the space where language ran out. After a while, Garrett's breathing shifted. The subtle, regular shift of someone crossing the border into sleep, not fighting it anymore, letting the anesthesia and the exhaustion and the end of sustained threat do their natural work. She watched him go and felt something in her chest that was not grief and not relief and not love exactly, but something that contained all three of those things and was larger than any of them individually. She stayed in the chair. She would sleep eventually. She always slept eventually. But right now there was something she was not ready to stop doing, which was being in the same room as Garrett, while he breathed steadily, and the color held in his face, and the machinery of his recovery ran its quiet essential work. She thought about the debrief. She thought about Chen's flat voice delivering two simultaneous verdicts, reprimand and commendation, punishment and recognition, the institutional response to something that did not fit the institution's categories. She thought about Webb's handshake and what it had communicated that his words had not needed to. She thought about Bishop in his house in Texas, in his garden. She pulled her phone from her pocket and looked at it for a moment. It was early morning local time, but afternoon in Texas. He would be awake. He was always awake. He had told her once that he had not slept past 5 in the morning in 40 years, that the body remembered its own schedule long after the reasons for it were gone. She dialed, and it rang once, twice. Tell me what's happening, Bishop said, and she did. She told him all of it quietly in the recovery room, with Garrett breathing steadily beside her and the bass running its constant rhythm outside, from the first hour of the hide to the last shot at 1,100 meters from the sequence, to Garrett's wound to the debrief and its double verdict. She told it straight through without editing the way she always told him things, because he had spent 20 years teaching her to read terrain accurately, and the first kind of terrain he had made her learn to read accurately was herself. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The specific quality of his silence that she had learned to read over 17 years, not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone who was deciding which of several things to say first. The 1,100-meter shot, he said. No spotter data. No spotter data, she confirmed. Wine call from Phil. Yes, another pause. Good one, he said. She almost laughed. After all of it, the 71 hours, the sequence, the counter sniper, the blood on her hands, and the debrief room, and the simultaneous reprimand and commendation, his first word was good, delivered in exactly the flat Texas cadence she had been hearing for 17 years. The reprimand, she said, it's going to affect my record. Yes, he said, it is. I'd do it again. I know, he said. That's why it's in your record. People who wouldn't do it again don't get the reprimand because they don't make the call in the first place. He paused. The silver star is because you did it right. The reprimand is because you did it your way. Both of those things are true, and they don't cancel each other out. She sat with that. Outside, a helicopter was coming in. She could feel it more than hear it. The deep, rhythmic pressure of rotor blades working the air. A familiar sound that meant something was either arriving or leaving. And in this business, those two things were often the same. Bishop, she said, yeah. The mission is not just the target, she said. It's the people who trust you. She could hear him breathe. She could hear the specific quality of the pause that followed, the pause of a man hearing his own words come back to him from across 17 years and a distance of several thousand miles from a context he had not been able to anticipate when he first said them, but had somehow known they were going to need. You remembered, he said. I always remembered, she said. I just finally understood it completely today. Bishop died on a Tuesday in November, 14 months after that phone call from Bagram. Reese got the news the way she got most difficult news, alone from a phone, in a place that was not built for grief. She was in a hallway at Quantico between a classroom where she had just finished a 3-hour session on wind reading and a break room where bad coffee was waiting. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, and the world shifted slightly on its axis, the way it does when someone who has been a fixed point in your life for 17 years is suddenly not there anymore. She stood in the hallway for a moment, just stood there. A young corporal walked past her with a rifle case and said, "Good morning, Staff Sergeant." And she said good morning back with the exact right cadence because 17 years of training meant that certain things ran on a track below conscious control. Then she found an empty classroom, sat down in a chair that was too small for an adult, put her elbows on her knees and let herself feel what she was feeling for exactly 3 minutes. Then she went back to work. She had been at Quantico for 11 months by then. The assignment had come 6 weeks after the formal inquiry, concluded not as punishment, though some people would read it that way, and she had made her peace with other people's readings. It had come because the commandant's office, in the way that institutions sometimes move, when they have someone they do not entirely know what to do with, had decided that the thing they could most cleanly do with Reese Callahan was to have her teach. She would run the advanced sniper program, the course that took Marines who were already qualified and pushed them into the territory beyond qualification, into the territory where the rules ran out and the fundamentals held, and the difference between the ones who came home and the ones who did not was what had been built into them before they left. She had not argued with the assignment. She had understood what it was. It was the Corps doing in its own institutional way exactly what Frank Bishop had done with her for 17 years, deciding that what she carried needed to be passed forward. That the most valuable thing about Reese Callahan was not what she could do in the field, though what she could do in the field had been established with considerable clarity, but what she could put into the next generation before they went. Garrett had called her the night the assignment came through. He was still in physical therapy, his shoulder mending with the particular slow stubbornness of a joint that had been seriously damaged and was not interested in being rushed. "Quantico," he had said. "Quantico," she had confirmed. "They're making you teach." Yes, a pause. Bishop would find that hilarious. Bishop would find it appropriate, she had said, which is different from hilarious. Another pause. "Are you okay with it?" She had thought about that with actual honesty, the kind she could only produce with Garrett, the kind that did not perform anything. "I think it's right," she had said finally. "I think there's a class of people who are going to go into situations like that valley, and some of them are not going to be built right when they get there, and I can fix that. Some of it, the part that's fixable." She had paused, and I think Bishop spent his last 20 years knowing he had built something worth building in me, and I want to spend the next 20 knowing the same thing. Garrett had been quiet for a long moment. Then he had said, "You're going to be a terrifying instructor." "Good," she had said. Now it was 11 months later, and Bishop was gone, and she was sitting in an empty classroom at Quantico with 3 minutes of grief already behind her, and the rest of it stored somewhere she would return to later when the day had room for it. She pulled her phone back out. She dialed Garrett. He answered on the first ring, which told her he already knew. "I heard," he said. "Yeah." "How are you working on it?" she said. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say anything about loss or legacy or the specific weight of outliving the person who made you. He understood, in the way that Garrett always understood, that what she needed was not comfort, but company, someone present on the other end of the silence who knew what the silence contained. So he just stayed on the line. After a minute, she said, "He told me something on that last call, the night from Bagram, after I'd told him everything. At the very end before we hung up." She paused. "He said, 'You're the best thing I ever built.' And I told him not to be sentimental, and he said he wasn't. He said it was an assessment." Garrett was quiet. "He was right," Garrett said. "It was an assessment." She went back to her class that afternoon. 12 Marines, all of them qualified, all of them good. All of them at the stage where good was the most dangerous thing a sniper could be. The stage where you had enough skill to be confident and not yet enough experience to know what confidence was not sufficient for. She had been that person once. She remembered exactly what she had not known then. She walked in and they came to attention, and she told them to sit down, and they did. She stood at the front of the room for a moment, looking at them the way Bishop had looked at her on the first day of advanced instruction, reading them building the picture. Who moved carefully and who moved fast? Who sat like they were holding stillness? And who sat like they had simply stopped? Who was watching her back with actual attention and who was managing the appearance of attention? She saw all of it. She always had. "Gunnery Sergeant Frank Bishop died this morning," she said. There was no soft way to open with it, and she had decided not to try. Most of you will not know that name yet. By the time you leave this program, you will know it the way you know your own." She paused. "Bishop trained me for 17 years. Everything I'm going to put into you in this program is something that started with him. I want you to understand that before we go any further, because I want you to understand where this comes from and why it matters." The room was very still, the kind of stillness that a room of trained Marines produces when they have registered that something real is happening. "What Bishop understood," she said, "and what I am going to spend the next months making sure you understand is that the skill is not the hardest part. The hardest part is what you do when the skill is not enough, when the equipment fails, when the intelligence is wrong, when the mission parameters don't fit the situation you're actually in." She looked at them, looked at each of them in the way that meant she was actually looking, not performing looking. "Every one of you is going to face a moment where the rules run out, where what you were told to do and what needs to be done are not the same thing, where you have to decide in real time with incomplete information what the mission actually is." A hand went up. Staff Sergeant Torres, the sharpest of the group by her current assessment, quick to process, careful to speak. "What's the answer, ma'am?" "When the rules run out." "The answer," she said, "is the people who trust you." She paused. "That's not a feeling. That's not a philosophy. That's a tactical principle. Every shot you take has consequences beyond the target. Every decision you make in the field has human weight attached to it. If you forget the people and only see the target, you will eventually make a decision that the skill can justify, but the mission cannot." Torres was writing something. Several of them were writing. She watched them write and felt the specific sensation she had been feeling for 11 months in this room, the sensation of something moving from inside her into them, of the architecture that Bishop had built in her beginning to take shape in new materials. It was not comfortable exactly. It was necessary. "I'm going to tell you about a mission," she said. "I'm not going to give you the classified details. I'm going to tell you the shape of it, the structural facts." She looked at them. "I spent 71 hours in a hide position in Afghanistan. My target was a single individual. When I arrived on station, I discovered 7 professional sniper teams in a coordinated defensive web around the target compound, and a SEAL extraction team unknowingly advancing into their kill zone." She paused. "I was authorized for one shot, one target, and I had about 40 minutes to decide what to do." The room was completely still. "I acted outside my mission parameters," she said. "I engaged all 7 sniper teams. I cleared the corridor. I protected the SEAL team. I completed the primary objective." She let that sit for a moment. "I also received a formal reprimand. It is in my record. It will be in my record until I leave the Corps." She saw the question on their faces before anyone asked it. Torres asked it. "Do you regret it, ma'am?" "No," she said. "I regret that I missed a counter-sniper element that wounded my spotter before I found and eliminated him. I regret that I had not built a complete enough picture of the threat environment in 71 hours. Those are operational failures and I own them." She paused. "I do not regret the decision to act. 12 men came home because of that decision. My spotter came home. The mission was completed. The reprimand is the price of operating outside institutional parameters, and it is a fair price, and I paid it without complaint." Another pause. "But I want you to hear something clearly. The fact that the outcome was good does not justify the decision retroactively. I made the decision based on what I knew at the time. I was right about what I knew. I was wrong about what I did not know. Both of those things are true simultaneously. You need to be able to hold that kind of complexity without resolving it into something simpler than it is." Sergeant Okafor, in the 3rd row, had been the quietest in the group so far. He raised his hand with the carefulness of someone choosing his moment. "How do you know, ma'am, when the call is yours to make versus when you wait for authorization?" She had been waiting for that question. She had been waiting for it since the first day she had stood in this room, because it was the question that everything else turned on, and there was no answer to it that could be reduced to a rule, which was exactly why they needed to hear it from someone who had lived through the version of it that could not be reduced. "You build the knowledge to make that call," she said. "Not the confidence, the knowledge. There's a difference. Confidence is a feeling. Knowledge is what you have when you've read the terrain, verified your assessment, exhausted your options for getting authorization, and still see clearly that the alternative to acting is worse than the consequence of acting without permission. She let that settle. And then you act, and then you live with everything that follows. The medal and the reprimand both. The things that went right and the things that didn't. All of it together without letting yourself separate the parts that feel good from the parts that don't. She looked at them. That is what command responsibility actually means. Not authority, responsibility. The full weight of outcomes. She ran the class for another 2 hours. She took them through wind reading exercises, starting without instruments, exactly the way Bishop had started, with her making them call shots from feel before she gave them data to confirm or correct their readings. She watched Torres argue with her assessment of a crosswind and then pull the shot and see it go exactly where she had said it would go. And she watched the expression on Torres's face in the moment of that confirmation. The expression of someone who has just discovered that their intuition was wrong and has processed this as information rather than insult, which was the first real indicator of a mind that could be built into something reliable. After the class, she ran individual sessions. She did this every day, 30 minutes with each Marine one-on-one, building the specific map of what each person needed and what was already there. Bishop had done the same with her. He had understood that a class could establish baselines, but individual sessions were where the actual architecture got built. She was finishing her last session, a quiet, methodical corporal named Park, who had the best natural trigger discipline she had seen in 11 months, and the most work still to do on reading environmental indicators when her phone buzzed. Garrett, she wrapped up with Park and stepped into the corridor and answered. "How was the class?" he asked. "Good," she said. "Torres is going to be exceptional. Okafor asked the right questions. Park has the best hands I've seen in this program." "Bishop used to say that about you," Garrett said, "that you had the best hands he'd seen." She leaned against the corridor wall. "He told me that once. I told him I didn't know what it meant." "What did he say?" "He said I would figure it out." She paused. "I figured it out today." A silence on Garrett's end. Then I got my clearance back. She straightened. This was not a casual statement. Garrett's shoulder had required 3 surgeries and 8 months of physical therapy, and the question of whether he would return to active operational status had been formally unresolved for that entire period. "When?" she said. "This morning. Same morning, Bishop." He stopped, started again. "The paperwork came through this morning. I'm cleared for return to full duty." She absorbed this. She thought about what it meant Garrett back in the field. Back in a hide position, somewhere back with a scope and a radio, and the specific discipline that she had watched him maintain even with a bullet in his shoulder. She thought about the counter sniper she had missed. She thought about what it had and what it could have cost, and the specific feeling of watching the color drain out of someone's face while you kept your hand on his wound and your eye on a target. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "Ready," he said. "I've been ready for 4 months. The shoulder is fine. My draw is fine. My shot is fine." A pause. "I know you're going to tell me to be careful." "I'm not going to tell you to be careful," she said. "I'm going to tell you to be complete. Know your threat picture. All of it. Don't stop at 7 when there might be 8. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him take a breath that was not quite a laugh, but had the bones of one in it. "Because of the counter sniper," he said. "Because of the counter sniper," she said. "That was on me as much as on you. We had a gap in our picture, and we didn't know we had it. That's the most dangerous kind of gap. I've been thinking about it since Bagram, and I've been teaching around it for 11 months. You do not stop building the picture until you are certain, completely certain, that you have the full perimeter. Not the likely perimeter, the full one." "Understood," he said. And she knew he meant it in the way she always knew what Garrett meant, which was completely and without reservation. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah." "Come back." Another pause, softer this time. "I always come back," he said. She put the phone away and stood in the corridor for a moment. Around her, the bass moved in its constant rhythm. Boots on the floors, voices, in rooms, the distant sound of a range running, drills the machinery of preparation that never fully stopped, because the need for it never fully stopped. She had spent 20 years inside that machinery. She knew every sound of it. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk and she pulled out the field notebook she had been keeping since her first deployment. Not a regulation notebook, a personal one. The kind Bishop had told her to keep from day one because the official record never captured everything that mattered, and you needed a place for everything that mattered to go. She had filled 7 of them over 20 years. This was the 8th. She opened to the last page she had written. She read it notes from a class session 3 weeks ago. Observations about how different students responded to the removal of instrumental data, what it revealed about who was building genuine knowledge versus who was managing the appearance of knowledge. Then she turned to a blank page. She wrote the date, she wrote Bishop's name, then she wrote 3 lines, the same 3 lines she had been turning over in her mind since the helicopter ride out of Afghanistan, since the phone call from Bagram, since the first day she had stood in front of a class of Marines and understood what she was actually doing there. Technology fails, fundamentals endure, every shot is moral. She looked at what she had written. Then she added one more line, the one that had not been there before today, the one that had crystallized in the moment Torres had asked, "Do you regret it?" And she had known the answer before the question was finished. The mission is not just the target. It is everyone who will live or die by what you decide. She closed the notebook. She put it in her desk drawer. She sat for a moment in the particular quality of late afternoon quiet that the office had at this hour when the day's instruction was done and the next day's preparation had not yet started, the small seam between what had already happened and what was coming. She thought about the inquiry board that had reviewed everything about the Afghan operation and concluded in the formal institutional language of such conclusions that while Staff Sergeant Callahan had operated outside authorized mission parameters, the circumstances were sufficiently exceptional and the outcome sufficiently significant that no further disciplinary action beyond the formal reprimand was warranted. She thought about the Silver Star ceremony, which had been quiet by her specific request. No formal ceremony, no assembled unit, just Webb and a few others in a room that was not performing anything. She had worn it once to a formal event and then put it in a box in her quarters because the wearing of it felt like a claim she had not earned alone, and the box felt more honest. She thought about the 7 men in that valley, the professional killers who had built a perfect web and waited. She thought about them without hatred. She had never had hatred for enemies Bishop had trained. That out of her early had told her that hatred narrowed your vision, and narrow vision got you killed. She thought about them with the cold, clear assessment of someone who had understood what they were capable of and had responded accordingly. They had been good, she had been better. That was the complete truth of it, and it did not require additional narrative. She thought about the SEAL team. She thought about Commander Hendricks, who had sent her a handwritten note 3 months after the operation, 3 sentences precise and unornamented, which was exactly the kind of man she had heard in his radio voice, and therefore exactly the kind of note she would have expected from him. The note said, "My team came home, all 12. Thank you." She had kept the note. It was in the box with the silver star. She thought about Garrett, cleared for duty this morning, ready to go back into the field carrying everything she had packed into him over 2 deployments and everything he had built himself in the years before her, and everything the shoulder and the recovery had added to the picture of what he knew. She thought about him in a hide somewhere 6 months from now, reading terrain building the picture, and she thought about him counting threat positions until he was certain, completely certain, that he had the full perimeter. She thought about Park's trigger discipline and Torres's wind argument, and Okafor's question about when the call becomes yours. She thought about 12 Marines sitting in a classroom being told that every shot is moral, and she thought about which of them would carry that forward into a situation that required it, and which of them she still needed to build toward that understanding, and what the next session needed to contain. That was the work. That was what the work had become. Not the 71 hours in the sequence. In the 1,100-meter shot, those were a single day of something that could not be planned. This was the daily work of making sure that the next person who faced a version of that day had what they needed to survive it and to make the right calls inside it, and to carry the weight of those calls afterward without being destroyed by them. Bishop had understood that. He had given her 20 years of daily work before she ever lay in that Afghan hillside. 20 years of fundamentals built so deep into her body that they ran without thought when thought was not available. 20 years of technology fails, but you do not fail if you build yourself right. She had given her students 11 months so far. She would give them years more. She would give them everything Bishop had given her, and everything she had added to it in the field, and everything the Afghan Valley had shown her that she had not known before she went there. The classrooms would keep turning over. New Marines would come in sharp and capable, and incomplete in the specific ways that needed filling. She would read each one of them the way she read terrain, looking for what was there, looking for what was missing, looking for what could be built and what needed to be built first before the rest could follow. She would be demanding in the way that Bishop had been demanding, which was to say completely and without compromise, but also with the specific patience of someone who understood that good things took the time they took and not one day less. She would send them into the field carrying what she had given them. Some of them would face situations where it was enough. Some would face situations where nothing was enough. She could not control that. She could only control the quality of what she put into them before they went. She could only build them the way Bishop had built her. And when they called from wherever they were, from recovery rooms or debrief rooms or the specific hallways between things where difficult news arrived, she would answer on the second ring. Not the first, not the third, the second. And she would say, "Tell me what's happening," because what was happening was the substance of everything. Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan had come to Afghanistan as a sniper with a mission, and left as something the mission had not anticipated: a woman who had seen the full shape of what her work meant and had carried it home and was spending every day since making sure it did not die with her. She was not a legend. She had no interest in being a legend. Legends were stories people told about the dead, and she was very much alive, and there was very much still work to do. She was a teacher. She was a Marine. She was the thing Frank Bishop had spent 20 years building, now spending her years building the next thing, and the thing after that in the patient, unending chain of people who pass forward what they know, so that the ones who come after them do not have to find it alone in the dark. That was the mission. That had always been the mission. And she was not done. Bishop died on a Tuesday in November, 14 months after the phone call from Bagram. Reese was standing in a corridor at Quantico when she got the news. Between a classroom where she had just finished 3 hours on wind reading and a break room with bad coffee going cold in a pot, nobody had tended. Her phone buzzed. She read the message, and the world did not spin or shatter or do any of the dramatic things that grief is supposed to do in stories. It just shifted, quietly, the way a compass shifts when the thing it has been pointing toward is no longer there. She stood in the corridor for 5 seconds. She let herself feel the full weight of it, without moving, without adjusting her face, without managing the moment for anyone, because there was no one watching. Then she walked to an empty classroom, sat in a chair that was too small, put her hands flat on the table in front of her, and gave herself 3 minutes. 3 minutes of not being operational. 3 minutes of being his person Frank Bishop had known before the Corps had fully finished building her, the young sniper who had stood on a range in Quantico, not knowing what she did not know, looking at an old man who saw in her something worth spending 20 years on. 3 minutes. Then she stood up and went back to work, because that is what he had built her to do. And honoring what someone built in you is the most complete form of grief there is. She called Garrett from the parking lot between sessions. He picked up before the second ring, which told her he already knew. "I heard," he said. His voice had the specific quality of a man who had been sitting with something for a few hours and had not found a way to make it smaller. "Yeah," she said. "How are you holding up?" "Working on it," she said. "Then he told me something on that last call, the one from Bagram, right at the end before we hung up." She paused. "He said I was the best thing he ever built. I told him not to be sentimental. He said he wasn't. He said it was an assessment." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He was right. And it wasn't sentimental. It was accurate." She said nothing. She looked at the sky above the parking lot, which was the gray of late November, flat and wide, and going nowhere. "He knew this was coming," Garrett said. "Not today specifically, but he knew the work was done. You said it yourself the last few calls he wasn't teaching anymore. He was just listening." That was true. The last 4 or 5 calls Bishop had said almost nothing. He had asked her to tell him what was happening, and then he had listened the way very old teachers listen when they are not teaching anymore, but are hearing the proof of everything they built. She had not understood it fully at the time. She understood it completely now. "He was checking," she said quietly. "Checking what?" "Whether it held," she said. "Everything he put into me, whether it held under real conditions. He needed to know it held before he was done." Another silence from Garrett, the kind that meant he was turning something over and finding it true from every angle. "Did it hold?" he asked. She She thought about Afghanistan, about 71 hours and 7 shots in an 1,100-meter call with no spotter data, and Garrett bleeding beside her, and the sequence running clean despite everything that tried to stop it. She thought about the debrief room and Chen's flat voice, and Webb's handshake and the silver star she kept in a box because wearing it felt like a claim she had not earned alone. She thought about 11 months of standing in front of classrooms building the next ones, passing it forward. It helped, she said. She heard Garrett exhale. Good, Dean, he said. Then he got to know that before he went. That's a good ending, Reese. She stood there a moment longer. Then she said, he would have hated a ceremony. Completely, Garrett said. He would have wanted someone to go to his range and fire a clean shot, and that would have been the whole thing. I know a range in Texas, Garrett said. I've been thinking about going. She felt something shift in her chest, not grief this time, something warmer and more complicated. I'll come, she said. Next leave cycle. We'll go together. Yeah, Garrett said. We will. She went back to her afternoon session. 12 Marines, all qualified, all sitting in the particular stillness of people who had heard something happen and were waiting to find out how it would change the room. She had not announced Bishop's death, and she was not going to announce it today. Today it belonged to her. Tomorrow it would belong to the curriculum, to the story of where everything they were learning came from and who had first understood that it mattered. She stood at the front and looked at them. Staff Sergeant Torres in the front row with her notebook already open. Sergeant Okafor 2 rows back, watching with the careful attention she had come to rely on. Corporal Park at the end of the 3rd row, hands quiet on the desk in the way that told her something about his nervous system even before he picked up a rifle. Let's talk about incomplete intelligence, she said. Specifically, let's talk about what you do when you have built the most thorough threat picture you are capable of building, and the threat picture is still wrong. She paused. She let them sit with the weight of that sentence. This happens, she said. It will happen to each of you. You will spend days building a picture, and you will be diligent, and you will be thorough, and there will still be something you did not find. And that thing you did not find will be the thing that tries to kill you. She looked at them. The question is not how to build a perfect picture, because there is no perfect picture. The question is what kind of person you are when the picture turns out to have a gap in it. Torres raised her hand. She had been the fastest to challenge assumptions in every session, which was one of the things that made her valuable. How do you respond to a threat you didn't know existed, ma'am? By definition, you are not prepared for it. By definition, Reese said, you are prepared for it because the preparation is not specific to a particular threat. The preparation is in your fundamentals, your breathing, your positioning, your ability to read environmental change in real time and respond to it before your conscious mind has finished processing it. She looked at Torres directly. I had a counter-sniper on a mission who had been in concealment for the same 71 hours I had been in concealment. I did not find him. He shot my spotter. She let that sit. She watched Torres absorb it. I found him at 1,100 meters with no spotter data and a shifted wind because Bishop had built into me the ability to make that call on pure fundamentals when nothing else was available. That is the preparation, not the specific threat, the foundation that responds to any threat. The room was completely still. Your spotter, Okafor said quietly, not a question. He knew the story. They all knew pieces of it, the way a story moves through a community before it is ever formally told. But he was asking her to confirm it, to make it real in the room. Corporal Danny Garrett, she said, 3 surgeries, 8 months of physical therapy, full return to duty. She paused. He is currently in the field. He is alive and operational because the fundamentals held when everything else was breaking, and because he is the best spotter I have worked with in 11 years, and because he stayed on the radio while he bled and kept a SEAL team from walking into a kill zone. She looked at them. I want you to understand that the mission I am describing was not won by one person. It was won by 2 people who had built themselves right enough that when the situation exceeded the plan, they could function at the level the situation required. Together. She ran the session for another 90 minutes. She took them through a scenario exercise, not live fire, not yet, but the mental architecture of it, the decision tree that runs before the trigger is ever involved. She gave them a situation deliberately underspecified and made them work through it in real time, calling their decisions out loud so she could hear not just the conclusions but the reasoning that produced them. She listened for the places where the reasoning skipped steps, where confidence filled in for knowledge, where the desire to act outran the discipline to wait for full information. Those were the gaps she needed to find and fill before they went anywhere that mattered. Torres, she noted, had the opposite problem from most of the class. Where others acted too fast, Torres wanted more information than any real situation would ever provide. She pushed for certainty in a context where certainty was not available and would not become available no matter how long she waited. That was its own kind of vulnerability, the paralysis of the person who could not act on a 90% picture because the missing 10% felt unbearable. After the session, she kept Torres back. "You know your instincts are good," Reese said. Not a compliment, a statement of fact delivered the way Bishop had always delivered assessments, as data, not praise. Torres nodded. She knew. "Your instinct for caution is the best in this class. You will never act on incomplete information when you can get more information. That is a genuine strength." Reese looked at her. "But you are also going to face situations where more information is not available, where 90% is what there is and 90% has to be enough, and waiting for the other 10% means someone dies." She paused. "I need you to build the ability to act on 90% without it feeling like failure, because it is not failure. It is command. It is the weight of the call that only you can make." Torres was quiet for a moment. She had that expression, the one Reese was beginning to recognize as the face Torres made when something had landed correctly rather than just registering as information. "How do you know, ma'am, when 90% is enough?" "When the cost of waiting exceeds the cost of the gap in your picture," Reese said. "That calculation is what experience builds. You cannot shortcut it. You can only build it by making the calls and living with the outcomes, all the outcomes, not just the ones that went right." Torres nodded slowly. "And when the outcome doesn't go right, then you own it completely," Reese said. "You do not distribute the blame. You do not re-narrate the decision to make it look better than it was. You look at exactly what you knew, exactly what you decided, exactly what happened, and you understand it without protecting yourself from it." She paused. "And then you go back to work, because the next situation doesn't wait for you to finish grieving the last one." Torres was writing. She wrote for a long moment after Reese stopped speaking, which meant she was not transcribing, she was processing, translating, making it hers. That was the sign. That was the thing Bishop had once pointed out in Reese herself in almost identical language. The ones who write after you stop speaking are the ones who are actually building something. Reese let her write. She waited. Then Torres looked up. "Staff Sergeant, did you know when you made the call in Afghanistan that it was the right call?" Reese looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the question with actual honesty. The full honesty she always brought to this specific kind of question, because anything less was a disservice to the person asking and to the truth of what the moment had actually been. "I knew it was the necessary call," she said. "I knew it was the only call I could live with, whether it was the right call that depended on outcomes I had not yet seen." She paused. "The outcomes told me it was right, but I could not know that when I made it. I made it anyway. That's what the call is. You make it with what you have, knowing you will not know if it was right until later, and you build yourself strong enough to carry it either way." Torres absorbed this. She closed her notebook. "Thank you, ma'am." "Go," Reese said. "Be ready for tomorrow. We're going to the range." She was in her office 2 hours later when the call came in. Not Garrett this time, a number she did not immediately recognize with a Texas area code. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Steady older with the particular quality of someone who had learned to manage difficult things by holding them at a certain careful distance. "Staff Sergeant Callahan, my name is Margaret Bishop, Frank's daughter." Reese sat up straight. She had known Bishop had a daughter. She had never spoken to her. Bishop had mentioned her rarely and specifically with the economy of a man who kept his personal life in a separate container from his professional one. "Yes, ma'am," Reese said. "I'm very sorry about your father." "Thank you," Margaret Bishop said. "He talked about you. He talked about you more than he talked about almost anything in the last 10 years. A pause. "He left something for you. He was very specific about it. He wrote out the instructions months ago when he knew things were getting to the end." She paused again. "He left you his field notebook, the one he kept from Korea. He said you would know what to do with it." Reese did not speak for a moment. She had known Bishop kept a notebook. He had been the one who had told her to keep one, had in fact told her to keep one on their first session together, had handed her a blank notebook and said, "Start writing," and had never explained further. She had kept 7. She was on her 8th. But she had never seen his. He had never shown it to her or mentioned its contents directly. It had simply been present in the range office, sometimes on the desk or in his kit, a plain worn thing that she had understood was private, in the way some things between people are simply understood to be private. "He told me something once," Reese said carefully. "He said he regretted not finding a student earlier, that it had taken him too long to find someone worth passing the work to." "He said that to me too," Margaret Bishop said. "Many times. He also said that when he found you, he understood it had taken exactly as long as it needed to." Her voice was steady but not without weight. "He said you were going to build more than he had. He said that was the only thing worth building anything for." Reese sat in her office in the late November quiet and held the phone and let that land where it needed to land in the place below argument where real things settle. "I'll take care of it," she said. "The notebook. I'll take care of it." "I know you will," Margaret Bishop said. He knew too. The notebook arrived 4 days later. Plain, worn at the corners. The cover had no label, no name, nothing that marked it as belonging to anyone or containing anything. She opened it carefully at her desk. Bishop's handwriting was exactly what she would have expected, square, precise, economical. He did not waste words in speech, and he did not waste them on the page. The early entries were dated from Korea in 1950, written in the flat, factual language of a young man recording operational details with the discipline of someone who had been told to write it down and did not yet fully understand why. But as the pages turned, and there were many pages, 60 years of pages, the entries changed. They deepened. They became something that was no longer just operational record and was not quite personal journal, but lived in the space between, in the territory where what happened and what it meant were impossible to separate. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago. She turned to it with care. It said she held. Send her the book. That was all. 4 words and an instruction. Everything that needed to be said exactly without one syllable more than was required. She sat with it for a long time. She sat until the light in the office changed and the bass outside went into its evening rhythm, and someone knocked on her door to tell her dinner was available, and she said she would be there shortly, and then sat a while longer. She thought about the first time Bishop had looked at her and seen something worth building. She thought about what it cost to build a person over 20 years. Not the effort, because effort was cheap, but the patience, the sustained, clear-eyed belief in what something could become, the willingness to still be working on it on the day you ran out of days. She thought about Torres's notebook and Park's hands and Okafor's questions and the 11 months of classrooms that had preceded today and the years of classrooms that would follow it. She thought about 12 men in a valley going home. She thought about Garrett cleared for duty in a field somewhere reading terrain. She closed Bishop's notebook carefully and placed it on the desk beside her own. 2 notebooks side by side. One that recorded everything he had built. One that was recording everything she was building with it. She opened her own to a fresh page. She picked up a pen. At the top of the page, she wrote the date, and then below it, 1 line. The same line she added to the beginning of every new page, the one she had been writing for 11 months, the line she had decided on the helicopter out of Afghanistan when she had finally understood completely what the job was. Build them right before they go. Everything else follows from that. She would go to Texas in the spring. She would take Garrett. They would go to the range Bishop had used for the last 30 years of his life. She knew which one he had described it enough times, and they would shoot clean shots in the open air. And that would be the memorial. And it would be exactly what he would have wanted, because it was exactly what he had been, a man who expressed everything that mattered through the precision of what he put into the work. She would stand at that range and she would feel him in everything she knew, because everything she knew had his fingerprints on it, and that was not grief and not memory, but something more permanent than either the specific immortality of a teacher whose students are still building what the teacher started. Reese Callahan had begun as a sniper with exceptional instincts and a rifle she understood better than most people understood themselves. She had become, in the years since Afghanistan, something that could not be reduced to a job title or a commendation or even a silver star kept in a box, because the wearing of it felt like an incomplete accounting. She had become the continuation of something Frank Bishop had started in a range office at Quantico decades ago, when he had looked at a young Marine and decided she was worth spending everything on. She had become the woman who answered on the second ring and said, "Tell me what's happening." She had become the proof that fundamentals endure, that what you build in a person, built right, built deep, does not fail when the technology fails and the orders don't fit. And the only thing standing between disaster and survival is what lives below thought. She was still building. She would keep building. Every Marine who came through her program and went into the field carrying the right architecture, the breathing and the patience and the moral clarity about what every shot meant and who it carried was the continuation of what Bishop had started. And she was extending the chain, running forward through time, each link stronger because the previous one had been built with care. That was the mission, the real one, the one beneath the one in the orders. And Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan had never once, not from the first shot to the last, walked away from her mission. She was not going to start now.